coaches. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, they can't hold a flame against you, ay. Blow the whistle, blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, got the game, it ain't no issue, yeah. Blowing the whistle, I had enough with you, the championship, it is gone. Ain't listen to you, I can't give it to you, cause you don't know what I've been on. This is the Coaches Podcast, ripping up everything off that. Back to back is not fun.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Coaches Podcast, guys. I am your host, as always, guys, Coach Steve. We have our last episode of the Rookie Talk for this 2025 offseason here, guys. We are starting with the wide receivers. And it's going to be a fun show today because there are definitely some interesting wide receivers that I'm sure are guys that we're going to talk about just in a second. Want to discuss and kind of break down because I know this wide receiver class can be very fluctuable with people who like certain players and whatnot. And we're going to talk about the top 10 or so based on, I think I did off Fantasy Pros, just their top 10. It's not any of our top 10 or anything like that. And then if we have time, we're going to get into some sleepers, some players that aren't in this top 10 list and go through those motions here today. So let me introduce our crew for today's show. Coach Tyler, brother, what's going on?
What's up, guys? Yeah, ready to jump in. We've only got, less than 2 weeks to the draft, so I'm excited.
Absolutely. And, of course, we have another guest on our today's show, John Laub. What's going on, my friend? How are you? How you been?
I'm doing great. I think this is the fourth year I've been on your show.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited to talk about some wide receivers. I've looked at tape of 39 and I put in lots of numbers. Some of them don't make the top 40 at the end, but I've seen a bunch of these wide receivers.
So have I, especially over the weekend. There's a lot of just right at the end. It was like tough to watch some of these guys, but there's some wide receivers that we're going to talk about today. And it's going to be really fun. So news-wise, there's not really too much going on. Obviously, the draft's coming up, guys, like Coach Tyler said, in another 10 days or so. Derek Carr has a potential shoulder injury that could knock him out for some serious time, potentially for 2025. We'll have to see how that shakes out with the NFL draft and everything. But we'll get into that Saints quarterback room at some other point this offseason. But not to waste any of you guys' time, let's get right into these wide receivers. As always, let's bring in my handy-dandy slideshow here. And we start off at the top. Tetero McMillan, or Tet, even though he doesn't like to be called Tet McMillan, but everyone in the world gave him this nickname at this point, so we're going to stick with it because it's a cool nickname. Tet's a cool nickname. Wide receiver out of Arizona. This past season, 84 receptions, 1,300 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns. He'll be 22 years old by the start of the NFL season. I'm gonna let you guys kind of get into it, but if you're listening live on our YouTube channel, I do have a great slideshow I bring up every week. It's some positive traits, some negative traits, but I'm gonna let the boys kind of break down their evaluation on these guys so we can get through the show today. So John, since you're our guest on today's show, I will let you go first, my friend. How do you feel about McMillan as a wide receiver here?
I do like him. However, if you put him in last year's class, he would be wide receiver 4 or 5. That's just depending on how strong last year's group was. He's going to have a really nice role in the NFL. I don't know if he ever has that Julio Jones, AJ Green ceiling. I don't think it's there. But if you're looking at a boundary receiver who can get between 1,100 and 1,200 yards, between 8 and 10 touchdowns, he's your man. I've liked T-Mac for a really long time. Early breakout, he immediately impacted the field as a freshman. His last 2 years have been really, really good. There's no question about that. And when I look at some of the key stats in my model, 16.1 yards per reception, that is very solid. 63% catch rate. It's not like he has an All-American quarterback throwing to him, so I like that a lot. Team aerial dominator, man, 44%. Opponents had to stop T-Mac, and they could not slow him down. And one of my key stats is receiving yards per team pass attempt. My benchmark is 2.5. He's 3.01. He's a plug and play X receiver from day one in the NFL. The only question is his ceiling, which I don't think it's super elite, but I think it's pretty high with a really nice floor.
That is a very great breakdown in McMillan. I love that there. I like McMillan a lot, on a personal level. But Coach Tyler, how do you feel about McMillan?
Yeah, I love McMillan. He is sort of bringing it back to the, Z receivers that I had growing up, right? The Calvin Johnsons, like John said, the Julio Jones, the AJ Greens. I agree with John. I don't think his ceiling is that high. I don't think he's going to be this perennial, we're going to talk about him in 25 years as one of the best Z receivers of all time. But just his size and the way that he plays the ball almost doesn't fit the receiver mold that we've had the last few years, right? I mean, Marvin Harrison somewhat stuck out with his size coming into the draft last year, but we've gotten used to this, 6 foot, 6'1", 190-pound receiver that we want to see coming out. And Tet comes in at 6'4", 220, right? This is a big dude. Boy. And one of my, favorite things about him is his jump ball ability, right? That's something that, especially if he goes to a team with a young or not outstanding quarterback, almost like he had at Arizona, that's something that's going to benefit both his production, but also the offense that he's in far more than anything else that he would do, because there's going to be some times that a quarterback's just going to have to say, hey, my guy versus yours, he's 6'4" and can get up. I think he's going to come down with the ball, right? There's been, some interesting articles that I've gotten to read and things I've seen on him about, he's from Hawaii, and growing up, he played a lot of volleyball. And if you watch his progression going into a jump ball, it looks a lot like that of a 6'4" volleyball hitter going up to meet a ball at its apex and hit it down with force, right? But instead of hitting it down, he's just grabbing it above anyone that's going to stand under him. I do like the negatives, right? Average yak yardage. His consistency is kind of up and down. I think that is attributed a lot more to his offense at Arizona, because outside of Tet, there wasn't a whole lot going on. But I have McMillan as my one in this draft until I know that Travis Hunter is playing 100% of the snaps as a receiver. But I love McMillan. I love the just the category of receiver that he falls into. And I think it's going to trip corners up, having to move outside and go from playing these, quicker in and out motion into the slot 6-foot receivers to having to now go try and box out a 6'4" guy that's going to go up and come down with just about anything thrown in his catch radius.
Oh, he absolutely will. I like McMillan a lot there. He is my wide receiver once currently in the class too. Big play, size. I wrote control twice because I rush things sometimes, and I didn't realize I wrote body. I meant to say body control. So if you're watching live, it's supposed to be body control, not control, like my dumbass did. But yeah, McMillan is one of my favorite wide receivers in this class, because it's not a very highlight class for my own personal interest. But moving on. All right. I'm going to be really bad. I'm terrible at names, John, if you ever notice, if I'm when you're on the show once a year. But I know the name. I'm going to say it wrong. Egbuka, right? Am I saying it right?
That is correct.
Right,
You're definitely close enough, my brother.
Okay.
Hey, you're 2 for 2 on like 2 of the hardest names in so I'm proud of you.
Having a good day for a Monday. So yes, Egbuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State. This past season, 81 receptions, just over 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. Will be 22 by the start of the NFL season. And of course, for some reason, I don't have any negatives in for him, but he's got a lot of great positives: ball tracking, a route running ability, catch radius. There's a lot of good things to say about this Ohio State wide receiver. But John, I'll let you kind of get into the nitty gritty when it comes to Egbuka.
So if I was going to say one thing negative, I'm not absolutely convinced that he is a boundary receiver all by himself. I think he's more of a slot receiver or a motion to the boundary. Maybe get him in some type of one-on-one matchup that's advantageous for him. I don't think he can just win outside all by himself sitting out there. So that's my only little concern. However, first we have to talk about the teammates that this young man has had. Jackson Smith-Njigba. Then he's had Marvin Harrison Jr., Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. And this year, if you haven't watched him, Jeremiah Smith, the freshman, he might be a top 3 pick in the NFL draft 2 more years from now. That's how good he was. So his teammate score is just ridiculously off the charts. And he leaves Ohio State as the all-time receiver in yards and catches. And we go back to guys like Terry Glenn. I mean, I've been watching Ohio State football, Chris Carter, Santonio Holmes for decades. So he ends up as the number 1 all-time in terms of raw production. When you dig a little deeper, 76% catch rate. I love Egbuka's hands. They're terrific. Despite playing next to Jeremiah Smith, he had a 29% aerial dominator with all of those great players on his team. I really like him. I think he has the highest floor. He's guaranteed, I've said this. If you remember Tyler Boyd coming out of Pittsburgh, ended up with Cincinnati, that's Tyler Boyd's floor, or that's Emeka Egbuka's floor. 800 to 900 yards, 6 to 8 touchdowns every year. However, in the right system, if he could play a Jordan Addison to a Justin Jefferson, or let's put him in Seattle, with Jackson Smith-Njigba. Well, they got Cooper Kupp. That's probably too redundant of assets right now. Similar receivers. But if you put him in the right situation, Egbuka can be very, very good. I think he's a 1B, but his ceiling is probably around 1,100 yards. I really like them. I think he's a steal in dynasty drafts. If you're a playoff team and he's sitting there at pick 10 or 11, I think that's a grand slam. You have a number 2 or 3 fantasy wide receiver, flex starter every week on your roster.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like what you said about him having one of the highest floors in this class because he, for me, feels like a really safe pick.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about the first round. There's a lot of upside of these wide receivers, but if I get Egbuka, I'll be pretty happy no matter at one point because I feel like he's going to be a hit in the fantasy world and in the NFL world. But Coach Tyler, how do you feel about the Ohio State wide receiver?
Yeah, I really like Egbuka. I like what John said. Highest floor. He's one of those guys that you really just kind of look at everything that's said about him. And the constant theme is always just pro ready, right? John laid out all the teammates he had in that receiver room. You don't think he learned a thing or two from any of them in their time at Ohio State? All these first-round pick receivers. And Egbuka, honestly, in my eyes, should probably follow suit with that. And, Brian Hartline, their receivers coach, has put out all of these guys, right? Egbuka didn't stay at Ohio State for lack of production, right? There's a couple years that we see, his freshman year, we see a lot more of his versatile skill set, right? A lot more in the return game. I want to say he was a finalist for, most versatile player in the nation. I forget what the award name is for that, but I want to say his freshman year, he was a finalist for the most versatile player in the nation because of his receiving and his returning abilities. And then you go into his sophomore year, right? This season that he shares a wide receiver room with, he has CJ Stroud as his quarterback. He shares a wide receiver room with Marvin Harrison Jr. and puts up 74 receptions for 1,150 yards, right? And this Marvin Harrison went, if I remember right, 4th overall in the draft last year.
4th.
So if you can stand next to a guy that goes 4th overall and still put up 1,100 yards while he's putting up, I want to say it was 1,400 yards, you're having yourself a season, right? A couple seasons ago, hampered by injury, but this past season, we saw him on this national championship team, 81 receptions, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. He is, by consensus, the most pro-ready receiver in this draft. And he is doing it, coming out at age 22, right? That age 22 by September 1st. A lot of the receivers in this draft are going to be at that 21, 22-year range. But you put a guy on the table that has 4 years of college experience at a prolific level in an outstanding receiving room. I love every second of it, right? I need John to quit telling people to go be excited about him at pick 10 because that's where I'm trying to get him in a lot of my drafts. So I just love Egbuka. He's a great route runner. There's a little bit with his agility that I could see improvements on, just in and out of breaks. There's some things that take a little bit longer to develop than, the Olaves or the JSNs that he had next to him. But I think, like y'all both said, highest floor in the draft for a receiver. And I think he's going to walk into a team day one. I don't expect him to be a number one on a team, but I expect him to be an outstanding receiver on whatever team he ends up with.
No, absolutely. Actually, I'm doing my one league. We do a pre NFL draft, like rookie draft, and he went at the 108. So definitely that's great value for whatever playoff team is at that spot there. It was a little too early for me to take him at 103, but I wish I did. But yeah, he's going to be a really good NFL player. Just hopefully lands in a situation that really can show off his strengths in a great way. So let's go over to our next wide receiver here. Luther Burton, wide receiver out of Missouri. This past season, 61 receptions, 667 yards, and 6 touchdowns. The 666 scare right there. 21 by the start of the September 1st. I ran a 4.4 at the I don't know if it was at the NFL Combine. Yeah, it was at the NFL Combine. That's all he ran. I don't think he did any other drills, if I'm not mistaken. But Luther Burton, very interesting wide receiver when watching film on him. I'm not as high on him as many other people may be. Maybe you guys are, but he's electric. That's what I can say about him early on. So, John, I like the Dolphins hoodie you got on today. So talk about Burton and break him down.
I agree with you, Coach Steve. I'm a little bit lower on him than consensus. I have him at number 5 in my rankings. And I understand the ceiling. And I think that ceiling is so enticing to people that they're not looking at the totality of his career or from more of a macro perspective. So if you watch Burton when he was a freshman, he had a challenge because they put him on the outside. And he just, he was young too. So, you try to give him some reasons why, why wasn't he a true breakout on the outside? Very hard for a young man to start and be successful as an outside receiver. Sophomore year, they move him into the slot in Eli Dinkowitz's system. And, oh, my God, that sophomore year in the SEC, I mean, it was just incredible. Like, he was among my top 2 prospects last summer. Loved the film, absolutely. Drafted him in college fantasy football leagues. Watched a ton of Missouri. Context. Missouri stunk last year. Really, I don't completely still understand what happened. They lost their best running back, but the entire offense fell apart. He was just bad. He was bad, and he was still in the inside slot. My concern watching the film, he runs mostly medium routes and short routes, long crossers, and they clearly designed plays specifically for him. Like, this is Burton. He's a number 1 target. If he's not open, throw it out of bounds or run Brady Cook, their quarterback. Like, it literally was so obviously Burton. Then I looked in the data in my model. His yards per reception, 11.8. That's just not very good. And what really frightens me in the data, his ADOT, 8.7. That's atrocious, people. Right now, the only ones, 8.7, whoa. I'm just looking at the list, a 7.9, a 9.9. There's a 6.7. One reason I'm so low on Savion Williams, but that's another day. Then we have ADOTs, 13.7, 13.8, 14.2, 15, 17. That's a red flag for me. When you have a low yards per reception and low ADOT, That's a red flag, and the film shows it. Now, let's be a little positive. 35% aerial dominator, so he can handle the workload. 69% catch rate. That's pretty good. Now, this is where my conundrum comes in. I mentioned I like receiving yards per team pass attempt. He has a 3.21. It's like this weird outlier amongst all those others. The benchmark is 2.5. He shatters it. Not an easy prospect to grade. I have a second round grade. I do think in dynasty leagues, he becomes a value in the second round. I'm not going to reach for him. I'll wait for the value to fall.
That's true. He went at the 202 in my recent rookie draft. So
I'm perfectly good with that's a fair price.
Yeah, it is. It is. You know, he kind of reminds me of Jaden Reed a little bit. Like Jaden Reed's got some explosiveness to him, but like Jaden Reed's got such a short area target receiver sometimes.
Yes.
Frustrating for fantasy. That's like there's so much talent it seems like, but like it doesn't translate to fantasy. And I feel like Burden could be very similar at the NFL level. But Coach Tyler, you know, how do you feel about Burden?
Yeah, you know, I really like Burden. I have him as my 4 right now, kind of consensus with how we're talking about him here. But, you know, like John said, Missouri sucked last year.
They were bad.
And, you know, everyone wants to bring in the conversation, you know, the drop in ADOT this past year. And, I mean, when you look at Mizzou and you look at Luther Burden's skill set, right? We see 2 seasons ago that 1,200-yard season, 14 yards per reception. You see this outstanding yards after catch receiver, right? That doesn't mean that that's all he's good at, but he's got the speed, he's got the open field ability to get you the yak yards. So I think as Eli Drinkowitz looks at his terrible quarterback in Brady Cook, he says, how can we make him, you know, even look better and make our offense not just go straight into 4th down? And that's give him quick dink and dunk throws to guys that can get downfield and make plays. And I think that that's where a lot of that drop-off in ADOT comes for Luther Burden. A lot of those, you know, short area, a lot of screen plays, especially this past year going to Luther Burden. And it's kind of like, hey, I mean, they had Theo Weiss, who flashed a little bit this past season, but they were really putting the offense on Luther Burden and saying, hey, we're going to give you the ball. Please go get something done so we don't lose every game that we play this year. And so I see that as the most like discerning reason why Luther Burden's ADOT dropped, why he went from a 1,200-yard receiver to a under 700-yard receiver.
It was bad.
But, you know, I look at him and he really, you know, that kind of prototype that we were talking about at receiver, that guy that you can somewhat keep on the outside, but you most of the time want to line him up outside, motion him into the slot, and then let him work the middle of the field. I think that's what Luther Burden does best, right? 6'2", 206, right there in that prototype. If he plays just about anywhere but Missouri this season, I think we're talking about possibly the number 1 receiver in the draft. But like John said, there's all these crazy outlier analytics because the team was terrible, and therefore Luther Burden had to be somewhat terrible. But you look at the film grades, and you look at the film, even if you look at just the screens in the short area plays from this season, and then you take what he can do downfield from 2 seasons ago in 23, you're looking at an outstanding receiver that, like y'all said, is going to be a value if he falls into the second round, right? If I'm not getting Egbuka at the 110, but Luther Burden sitting right there, and there's not just like a crazy outlier guy that should have been taken at 104 and people are just sleeping on him, like I'm perfectly happy taking Luther Burden, because if he walks into a system where he's able to, you know, actually play receiver and not just kind of stand there and then make something happen, not just be a out wide running back, then I think he has all the tools to thrive. There have been drop problems, a few drops here and there over the past few seasons, but I like Burden. I've seen a lot of him mocked to the Dallas Cowboys, and I don't hate seeing him there with CD and them kind of playing off of each other in a role that really looks similar.
Okay. I like it. All right. Moving on to our next wide receiver here. Matthew Golden, wide receiver out of Texas. This past season, 58 receptions, 987 yards, 9 touchdowns, 22 by the start of the NFL season. Ran the fastest 40 time among wide receivers at a 4.29. What can you say about Matthew Golden? He was fun to watch on film personally. I like a lot of things about him. I know there's some fluctuation in his value from things I've heard and read. But John, how do you feel about Golden?
I like him very much. He's
There
my
you go.
number 3 receiver.
Love it.
And I think there are some things I want to address because I hear a lot of different perspectives on Matthew Golden. He's much better than Henry Ruggs coming out of Alabama. I hear people talk about Henry Ruggs, and he might look similar in an analytical model, and I like my model, but when you watch the tape, he's so much better than Henry Ruggs. So I don't really like that comparison. 2, he started immediately as a freshman for the University of Houston. Second year, they fell apart. When people talk about what happened to the Cougars and why was he not so good as a sophomore, well, then watch the tape and watch some college football, because that University of Houston football program literally fell apart in 2023, and Matthew Golden suffered from it from a statistical standpoint. But he did play on the field immediately. Then he goes to Texas. I was surprised that he had transferred, especially it seemed like a crowded locker room last summer. It took him a while until Isaiah Bond got injured, and then Golden started getting peppered with more targets. You look at his last 6 games, he played as well as any receiver in college football. He was tremendous in the playoffs. And how I evaluate Matthew Golden, you have to project. And I understand that there's a little bit of saying, but the stats, the analytics, what happened sophomore year, I get that. But if you look at his route running, you look at his hands, you look at the totality of the model of what he plays in, I really like this young man. And I'm not a guy who goes for speed. I didn't like John Ross. I had no shares of Henry Ruggs. That's not my thing. I'll say this. I think he plays slower than his combine time, but he plays smarter as a receiver. There is a difference between football speed and straight 40-yard dash sprint speed. He has very good football speed. I love the body control. I love the hands. I love what this young man has done. And what is he going to be 3 years from now? He's my number 3.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I'm a big fan of Golden. I like watching him on film there. I feel like, well, after I watched his film and I'm hearing so many different things about him, I was like, why are people so down on him? I'm just like, the film's there. He's showing it on film. Like, what am I not seeing that these people aren't understanding when watching the film? But
I think he's 20 right now, isn't he?
20? I mean,
I think so. He'll be like 21, I believe.
Maybe. I could have missed that. Let me double.
Young, man.
He's 20. He'll be 20. He'll be 22 by the start of the draft.
No, he'll be 22. Yeah,
or by the start of the season.
He's 21.
Start of the season. Sorry.
Yeah,
so
he's
1 year older than I thought.
Yeah, he's 21. He'll be 22 in August. So
that's young, though.
That is young. That's barely 22 going in the NFL season. Coach Tyler, how do you feel about Matthew Golden?
Yeah, being someone from the Houston area, I loved when Matthew Golden went to the University of Houston. They're kind of like that number 2 cheering school behind my alma mater. And so I loved seeing him there, right? Loved seeing him with Clayton Tune. That was a good little freshman year for him. And then being the Texas Tech guy I am, got to go watch Donovan Smith just destroy the University of Houston. So some good, some bad in that. Those games transpired. But, the move to Texas was the right move for Golden. It was a move that broke my heart because I absolutely hate the University of Texas. But he finally got to be on that, big stage, right? His freshman year where he was starting immediately, where he was putting together these great, tape watching moments, he was playing in the American. Not a ton of people are watching American Conference football. And then he comes to the Big 12 and finally gets put on this, Power 4 stage with realignment. And Houston implodes. And so everyone's like, hey, I thought this guy was supposed to be this, 4-star, 5-star talent. I thought he was supposed to be this big name that's going to, put Houston back on the map with football. And he did everything that he could. But when you can't get a ball to you, there's not much that you can do. So the move to Texas was the smartest move. Both put him on the national scale with the SEC and, got him into the college football playoff. So the nation was watching and he showed up in the biggest moments. He was not afraid of the spotlight. He was not afraid of the limelight. And I think that speaks so much to who he was on, being able to make that transfer from Houston to the University of Texas. That's a big jump no matter how you feel about both schools. That's a very big jump. And going into playing SEC teams when you go from, one great year in the American and one terrible year in the Big 12, jumping into the SEC, especially with it being more competitive this year than it's been in the past decade and a half, he showed up when he needed to. And I think that, the 4.29 really solidified how teams viewed him on his draft stock. He does a lot of things extremely well. There are a little bit of refinement issues that I would like to see. I think part of that comes from the coaching staff that was at Houston. They didn't mature receivers well, but, you can only do so much in a year at Texas. So I think that he's going to be a great receiver in the league. People still have him with a round 1 stock on him. I like that. I really do see him as more of a round 2 wide receiver in the NFL draft. I think people are a little bit more blinded by the 4.29 than anything. But Golden's a guy I've loved for years. I have a lot of Devy shares of him, so really ready for him to hit the NFL level. But I have him as my 5 right now in this class. And that's not any pushback on him. He's just the end of the tier of really good wide receivers at the top. And then we'll get into the rest of them after Travis Hunter.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's one thing real quick before we move on. I know I wasn't going to talk too much, but based on my analysis I did on the NFL Combine over the last 10 years, not a single wide receiver who's finished with a 4.2 whatever has actually finished with a wide receiver 2 better finish in fantasy over the last 10 years. Not the bring down Matthew Golden, but
it's not good when you look at the straight 40.
Yes, it's not. Unfortunately,
not good.
Not good. But hopefully you can kind of defy the laws of statistics. So, but moving on to our next player here. One is very, very interesting. Travis Hunter, wide receiver / DB, cornerback, whatever you want to call it, out of Colorado. And if you don't know Travis Hunter, you must be living under a rock because he's probably one of the most talked about NFL prospects coming in here as a who knows what position he's going to play. Is he going to be a cornerback? Is he going to be a wide receiver? Is he going to try to do both at the NFL level? We have no idea. But speaking outside of a fantasy outside of a regular prospect, his fantasy value, I wrote in as positive as fantasy god because it's going to be interesting what he does at the NFL level. But going back to a more of a prospect level here, last season he had 96 receptions, 1,200 yards, 15 touchdowns. He'll be 22 by the start of the NFL season. So, John, how do you feel about Travis Hunter as a wide receiver? We're going to stick to wide receiver because obviously, DB is always just great in a general sense, but it's not going to help us. Well, it is going to help us in fantasy, but we want to know about him as a wide receiver.
Hey, ironically, I play in a Dynasty IDP league. Oh. I think I could make Travis Hunter the number 1 pick.
Oh, 100%.
In that league. And I'm so mad because I have the 10th pick and I don't think he's going to make it to me in the IDP league. Now, when I first recorded and talked about Travis Hunter in January, I said he was my number 2 wide receiver. For my film breakdown and my model, he is my number 2 wide receiver. Yet this is fantasy, and we're not sure if he's going to play, 90 snaps out at wide receiver. We'll know more going forward. But as just a pure wide receiver, he's my number 5 right now. And that's if he got 45% of the snaps at wide receiver. My model loved him. 2.61 receiving yards per team pass attempt. He had a 30% dominator rating as a wide receiver, 76% catch rate. Those are insane numbers, people. And his ball skills, when you watch him, his hands, his footwork, and his body control are absolutely out of control, as good as any athlete I've ever seen. And I mean, his Heisman season to me is going down with Charles Woodson at Michigan. The two individual greatest. I get the quarterbacks, I get the running backs, but I mean what Charles Woodson and Travis Hunter did from cornerback, unfreaking believable. The two Heisman seasons. I love him, but as a fantasy wide receiver, he's my number 5 right now.
Okay. I like it. I like it. I think he's my 3 currently right now at the moment. But Coach Tyler, where are you at on Travis Hunter?
Yeah, I have him as my 3 until I know how much he's playing on offense. Kind of like John said, especially if you can work it into your scoring correctly, if he can be an IDP for you, or even a receiver, if he's getting interceptions and you're getting 2 points per interception, he's turning around and getting receptions for you on offense, you're going to do just fine. He is, he's going to be to fantasy football what Shohei Ohtani is to fantasy baseball.
He is in IDP leagues.
Yeah, he is. And so, Hunter is. He's just so polarizing. Like John said, we haven't seen someone like this since Charles Woodson. We've seen two-way players before, but not at the elite level that Travis Hunter is, right? If he was going into the draft as just a cornerback, he's my number 1 corner. If he's going into the draft as just a receiver, I'm honestly putting him as my number 1 receiver, right? I think he's that good.
He's good, man.
The problem is he's been very outspoken about wanting to maintain the role that he had at Colorado, right? Playing both sides of the ball as 50-50 as he could. I don't know if that's going to work at the NFL level, and I know corner pays a lot more than receiver. But to be fair, most teams in the position to draft him are in need of receiver help. So at least the first couple seasons you have him, he's probably going to be out there at receiver because these teams would be dumb to not play him at receiver, right? If he goes to the Patriots, I know they just got Stephon Diggs, but he's 31 years old, I think, coming off a torn ACL. If he goes to Cleveland, right, you've got an old Amari Cooper, you've got Jerry Jeudy, who kind of broke out last year in like his 5th year in the league, right? They could use a wide receiver. So really you're getting the best of both worlds here as an elite corner and elite receiver. For fantasy purposes, I still love Travis Hunter. I just want to know how much he's going to play on offense before I draft him, right? If you're in a position like John, if you're in an IDP league and you can work your way into getting him as your IDP player, please do it. There's nothing that's going to fail you, because even if he just has regular IDP stats, he's the number 1 corner in this draft. And then, whatever offense he does play, he's explosive enough. He is an athlete, right? He was the number 1 athlete he was the number 1 player in the nation coming out of high school. Went to Jackson State because he loves Deion. He wanted to be the athlete that Deion was, right? And when Deion went to Colorado, the first person that came with him wasn't even his son. It was Travis Hunter, right? Travis Hunter wanted to learn, and he was refined as a DB, but he came into Colorado talking to Deion about, Coach Prime, I want to be a better receiver. How do I do that? How do I get to this level, right? And that's where we've seen that jump these past 2 seasons, right? 57 for 721 and 96 for 1258 and 15 touchdowns. If I could ensure that he's playing 60-70% of snaps as a receiver, I think with a little bit more refinement at the NFL level, I think he's the number 1 receiver in this draft. The problem is I don't have the promise of that. So it scares me, but I think teams are still going to be outspoken whenever they draft him of, this is how we're going to use him. And I think that he's in a position to be a top 5 pick for 5 teams that really could all use receivers as well as corners. So I have Hunter as my 3 until I know his offensive production or his offensive consistency in terms of playing snaps. But he's played 2,600 snaps over the last 2 years at Colorado. He can do it. We just have to see if he can do it at the NFL level.
Right. Absolutely. That's going to be a big key factor. I feel like it's going to be like a historic rookie year for him in terms of doing that. It's going to be headline news for the NFL and fantasy, but he did go at the 104 in my rookie draft here. I chose Amari Hampton over him, but he did go high. So he's going to go high. And if he gets drafted, he's likely going to be a top 5 pick for a lot of people, unless they confirm that he's going to be a DB. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But he is a very interesting and amazing prospect, that's for sure, no matter what he does at the NFL level. All right, over our next wide receiver here, Trey Harris, wide receiver out of Ole Miss here. This past season, 60 receptions, just over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. He'll be 23 years old by the start of the NFL season. Average NFL combine, 4.5, 440, 35-point-inch vertical jump, 125-inch broad jump. I'm not a big Trey Harris guy. Wasn't a big, so I'm really gonna turn to you guys and see if you guys like Trey Harris on this one. So, John, I'll let you go first. How do you feel about Trey Harris?
I'm a little lower than the consensus on what did you say? It was fantasy experts or fantasy? I forgot what
Fantasy
you said.
Pros. Yeah, this is
Fantasy Pros.
Yeah,
sorry,
this is the 6th wide receiver off their board.
I have him at number 8. He started out at Louisiana Tech, then he transferred to Mississippi, and he's smashed in the SEC. There's no question about it. And he was on pace for an all-time terrific season, but he got hurt, and I think he missed the last 5 games of the year, at least the last 4 games of the year. My model says he's very good. I think he's a little slower than you would like for an elite receiver, but I will say I do think he can play on the boundary and on the inside, so there's some versatility with Trey Harris. And when you are successful at the SEC level, I'm okay with it. I have a 2nd-round grade. I don't think he gets into the 1st round. I would love him in the 2nd round of my dynasty draft unless he gets that. What if the Chiefs took him with Patrick Mahomes? That would obviously change, but I would be okay with them in the mid-2nd round.
All right, I like it. Didn't make me feel bad about him, so I like it. I'm still down on him, but Coach Tyler, I'll let you go. How do you feel about Harris?
Yeah, I have Harris as my 7 right now. There's a guy that we'll talk about in a minute that has that spot above him, but Harris is he's the beginning of that tier. Like I said, right? We had that top 5, and that's kind of our tier of like great wide receivers in this draft, right? Not saying they're all going to be perennial number 1s in the league, but if we're tiering it out, there's really kind of 5 guys that I want in the draft and then a bunch of guys I'm taking shots on. And then Trey Harris is going to be one of those guys that you have to take a shot on, right? If you watch his time at Mississippi, and if you can get film of him at Louisiana Tech, he is just this, straight line X receiver, right? He's this combo of size and speed that I think is going to have a role in the NFL, right? Like John said, if you put him in Kansas City, Mahomes is going to find him, and he's going to be successful and, produce for your fantasy teams. But there's just a little bit of the nuances that I see that I don't absolutely love. Ole Miss does run kind of a run and gun simplified system. So, those negatives of his route tree and route running through that route tree or that limited route tree, not outstanding. Doesn't really wow me. The injuries definitely, both of his years in the SEC has dealt with injuries that have knocked him out for multiple games. But I just don't see a ton of guys better than him that I would put on most teams that could produce the same, right? He's going to be the big play home run hitter. I put him almost in the same category as a Gabe Davis, but I think he's a little bit better than Gabe Davis. But, you stick him on a team like the Bills when Gabe Davis was there and give him that role of, hey, go down the field, we'll find you. You could have some great production out of that. But, he falls in at my 7, just not a ton after the top 5 that I'm overly excited for. But he's one of those guys that if I value size and speed, he's the one that I'm taking outside of that top 5.
I have him at 10 currently right now. And he went at the 212 in this recent draft. So if he ends up doing well, oh, John, I think you're muted.
That's a very nice price, 212 for Trey Harris.
So someone got a nice deal in my draft for him. So I went with Dylan Sampson. So I like Dylan Sampson a lot. But we're not talking about running backs today. But
another size speed guy. It's the model.
All right, over to our next guy here, Jaden Higgins, wide receiver out of Iowa State here. This past season, 87 receptions, 1,183 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns, will be 22 years old by the NFL draft. He had a really good NFL combine, 4.47 40, 39-inch vertical jump, 128-inch broad jump. I like this guy, NFL size, hands, route running, a lot of good things about him. Overall that I like. I think I have him as my wide receiver 9. I have him at 9. I still like him a lot, but he's my wide receiver 9 right now over Trey Harris. So I like him better than Fantasy Pros does in terms of that sense. But John, how do you feel about Higgins as a wide receiver?
Well, Coach Steve, you and I are on the same wavelength. He's my wide receiver 9.
Hey.
And I will say I did not expect that 40 time of 4.47. Now, I joke with my teammate on the rookie big board, Matt Hicks. He loves separators. And Matt, when you work with someone and you do 6 years of film study, you learn from each other. And I will say I've become a little bit of a separator snob listening to my teammate all the time. And why do I say this? I don't see a lot of separation with Jaden Higgins. And in general, I have been burnt by too many of these guys who don't create separation at the NFL level. Yes, he's a good route runner. Yes, he has a big frame, 6'4", 214. My model likes him. He was only a 2-year starter for Iowa State. If your viewers don't know, he was a transfer from the FCS level. So when you look in the total number of receptions for his career in yards, it is based on 2 seasons. Because he did not even play at the G5 level. He was down at the FCS level. So he's come a long way. I do like him, but I have a 3rd-round grade because of lack of separation, and I think that matters at the NFL. I think he's a big slot receiver.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a boundary receiver who can win outside against elite-level corners. So I'm interested in him, but I'm going to say, sneak peek, I like his teammate who we're going to look at next a lot better.
That's true. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But Coach Tyler, how do you feel about Higgins?
Yeah, Jaden Higgins reminds me a lot of another Iowa State receiver that came out a few years ago, and Xavier Hutchinson, right?
Yep. And Hakeem Butler.
Hopefully they don't end the same. He doesn't end the same way as they did.
Hopefully not. Hey, Xavier Hutchinson, 4-year, 4th-year breakout coming up.
Oh.
But, about the same size right there. I think Hutchinson was like 6'3", 210. Higgins is 6'4", 214, 215. So about the same size. They do a lot of the same things well, right? This mismatch in the slot that, has the size but isn't necessarily a, outstanding burst guy. Not a ton of acceleration in and out of the breaks. And so you kind of have to win with the body in the slot. And that can work at the NFL level. But as we've seen with both of the guys that we just talked about, it doesn't always work at the NFL level. Higgins is not a guy that I, hate. I have a round 3 grade on him. I have him as my 8. So just a spot above y'all. But I just get so many shades of that Xavier Hutchinson that kind of like Coach Steve said, I don't want him to end up, having the same career. I don't want to get burned twice by getting the same player. If I remember right, I want to say Hutchinson was number 9 at Iowa State. He may have been 19. But, just looking at – he was 8. So one number off. It's just everything reminds me of Xavier Hutchinson. And that scares me because I was somewhat high on Xavier Hutchinson after watching his mismatch in the slot and then seeing it just not work out at the NFL level. I'm kind of scared off of Higgins, but I have him as my 8. Honestly, I'm okay pushing him down to my 9 just to join in suit with y'all.
Yeah. Oh man, I loved Xavier Hutchinson coming out. Very, very upset that he hasn't panned out yet. Sure, for you, Tyler. Over to our next guy here. Sticking with the Iowa State wide receiver Jalen Noel. This past season, 80 receptions, 1,194 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns. Also will be 22 years old by the start of the NFL season. Had the best NFL combine in terms of my analysis breakdown. 4.3940, a 41.5 vertical jump, 134-inch broad jump, a 4.17 shuttle time. John, you mentioned you like this guy a lot. So talk about Jalen Noel there for us.
I fell in love with him. I love this young man. I love his ability to separate. I love his ability to win from the slot. He can challenge secondaries deep down the seam. He's 5'10", 194. Do not say he's small. He is not small. He is well built. He can take a punch. He's not afraid to secure that ball and get leveled by a safety. But paradoxically, he's slippery and elusive. If you don't hit and wrap him, he gets away. And you mentioned the combine coach, 4.39. But here's what's more impressive. 4.17 in the 20-yard shuttle, 6.82 in the 3-cone drill. What I saw on film, immediate burst, elite elusiveness and separation skills, explosion. That's in the 20-yard shuttle and the 3-cone drill. My model loves this man. If Tom Brady, Josh McDaniels, and Bill Belichick would still be in New England, Jalen Noel would be the perfect slot receiver in that Julian Edelman / Wes Welker role. I love him. He's my number 6, or 7. I'm more bullish than most.
I love it. I like Noel too. He's my number. I just have him at number 8, or no 7. He's my number 8. He is my number 8. So, Coach Tyler, how do you feel about him?
Yeah, Noel falls into that, range. We talked a lot last year. There's a lot of slot receivers that came out in the draft. And with a lot of the guys that we talked about last year, right? We say that he fits this slot receiver role. That's not that's not diminishing anything that he can do on the field, but instead it's praising what he does extremely well, right? 5'10", 194. I'm not putting that on the outside no matter what.
No. No, he's such a good inside.
So I'm putting him in the set burst, that elusiveness. Like John said, he's slippery, and that is both in his route running and with the ball in his hands, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to beat. But as we look towards the NFL, one thing that I think teams are going to like the most about him is, obviously his ability to be an excellent slot receiver, but also his kick return ability, right?
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
We're going into the second year of the new kickoff rules. Teams are trying to craft up the ways to, be dominant in the kick return game as everyone's still, we're in the early stages. Everyone's still trying to figure it out. And he was, a very good returner in his time at Iowa State, right? Obviously, those numbers go down as he works higher and higher into his, role at receiver. But, his freshman year, 11 kick returns, 15 punt returns, 14 kick returns and 11 punt returns in 22, 9 kick returns, 14 punt returns in 23. And then we only see 3 kick returns, but 13 punt returns here. So you want to find a way onto a field, go be an outstanding returner, especially in the new age of the special teams game. Go be a great returner, but he's also going to be a great slot receiver. So you have, especially if you're in a return yards league, if you're in a league where you get points for that, this guy should be high up on your list. He's not jumping any of the first round guys that we've talked about, but he should be high up on your list because he's going to provide a lot in that area.
I forgot to mention, even though I said Julian Edelman, Wes Welker, he also reminds me a lot of Jarvis Landry. If you remember him with Miami and Cleveland, like he could just suck up those 140 targets.
Sure can.
You know, he might only get 1,000 yards, but man, he's going to be in PPR gold in the right offense.
Those were great days. That's for sure. Well, thank you.
I love Jarvis Landry.
Thank you, John, getting Jamie to subscribe to the coaches. Jamie also said, John, can you break down Tyler Shuck breakdown on our rookie big board?
Tell Jamie we're actually doing it tonight on our next sleepers because I have a hard out. I actually have to go record our sleepers, and Shuck's on the docket.
Yes, he is. We got 5 minutes to get John, 4 minutes to get John out of here. So let's
I'll have to go watch that because
let's get over to our next one.
I've got some words on Shuck.
All right, next one here. Ayomanor, wide receiver out of Stanford. This past season, 63 receptions, 831 yards, 6 touchdowns, 22 years old by the start of the NFL season. Good combine, 4.44 40. 38-inch vertical jump, 120-inch broad jump here. John, I'll let you go talk about the Stanford wide receiver, someone I like a lot. So,
yeah, I'm way higher on him than Fantasy Pros. I have him at my number 6 receiver. I believe that people don't know how fast he is. He ran a 4.4 at the combine. When you're talking about a man who's 6'1", 206, and if you understand his background, he was a track star on the Canadian national team before he came to America and Massachusetts to play football. I think he was like rated number 8 and the track and field in Canada up north, and you do see it on film. I have him as a classic X. I think he ran 87% of his routes on the boundary for Stanford. That is still a rare skill when you can find an X receiver. And he's not T-Mac, but if you put him on the X, he's going to dominate there. I think he's in the T. Higgins bucket, and T. Higgins has been very good. Now, obviously, Higgins benefits by playing with Jamar Chase, but I think that's what Ayomanor is. He's your X receiver. And I just want to say, friends, I'm sorry I have a hard out. I apologize for that. So what I did want to say was my number, I'm looking at the list. Jalen Royals, I also have him at number 10. And Coach Steve asked me for one sleeper. Go to the player profiler right now, and my number 1 sleeper is Kyle Williams of Washington State. He's my number 13. Absolutely love him. I broke him down in an incredible scouting report and prospect profile. Go check it out on Player Profiler. It literally came out today, and Kyle Williams is my number 13 wide receiver.
Absolutely. John, we appreciate you for jumping on the show today, my friend. We're going to let you go so you can get yourself ready for your show. And as soon as we wrap up over here, we're going to come check you guys out here. So if there's anything else you want to say, my friend, real quick.
I just want to thank you very much for having me on. Sorry, I got double booked. It's such a busy week for me the next 10 days, but I can't thank both of you enough, and thank you for having me on. Hope to see you next year, gentlemen.
Absolutely, John. You are the face of April, so we thank you for being on the show, brother. Well, we will talk soon, my friend. All right, Coach Tyler, we are going back here to Ayomanor. Am I saying it right? I can't talk.
I've always heard it Ayomanor.
Ayomanor. Ayo. All right, I'll let you go ahead and talk about Ayomanor there, Coach Tyler.
Yeah, I'm just calling. Actually, I don't know that his first name is any easier. But he's an interesting player to me because he has this size and this speed like John talked about, right? Actually measured it at 6'2" at the combine, so he's a little bit high, a little bit taller than John's 6'1" that he said, but 6'2", 206, 10-inch hands. He's got the catch radius, 32 3/8 inch arm length. So he's got, the wingspan. He's got the catch radius. But for a guy of his size, there is a little bit of the downfield that I would like to see more of. Both with the catch radius and the hand size, I would think that, playing a ball downfield, he, like John said, he's not Ted. He's not a guy that's going to necessarily go up and get it. But there's a little bit of the ball tracking skills that, we kind of lose the ball or we see it late. There's, his hand placement on different, routes is kind of iffy. And that's what's led to, some of those drops that's in that negative category right there. So Ayomanor's, he's my I'm at my 9 right now.
You're the low guy on him. All right.
Yeah, I'm at my 9 right now. I see why everyone likes him. I'm just struggling to find the love for him that everyone else in the fantasy community has. And so he's one of those guys that I personally am okay even having him where I have him ranked. There's guys behind him that I would probably take barring outstanding, landing spot situations.
That's fair. That's fair. I have him at 5, to be honest. I'm a huge fan of the film I watched of him there. What did Jamie said? He fits better playing alongside a bigger bodied boundary wide receiver. Number 2, kind of like Chris Godwin to Mike Evans or Robin to someone's Batman. Yeah, I like that there a lot there. Honestly, he kind of reminded me a little bit of Cortland Sutton to some extent. I mean, not fully, but I just saw something in the game when I watched the film on him that really made me like him. I thought he was a really solid wide receiver, kind of like slightly like lower floor than Egbuka, but still a really strong guy. I don't think he's an elite player, but I think he's got a really high floor. That's really part of the reason why I like him, because I feel like there's so many wide receivers in this class that have some ceiling to them, but their floors are rough. And Ayomanor is someone I don't see having a bad floor at all. So, all right, let's get over to our next guy here. The number 10 guy on the list here, Jaden Royals, wide receiver out of Utah State. This past season, 55 receptions, 834 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns. 22 years old by the start of the NFL season here. Ran a 4.42 for the 40-yard combine. The 40-yard time. I'm starting to struggle down at the end of the day here. But Jaden Royals, another guy I really do like a lot here. I mean, he's someone I'm sitting at my number 7 wide receiver on this list here. So of the top 10 of fantasy pros, I think all the top 10 guys are in my list here, but in some different order. But Royals is 7 for me. I just like a good wide receiver who's a good route runner. To me, I feel like that's just the basis of a good wide receiver for me personally. Someone who can run and make all those routes, be at the next level there. Someone who has that yards after catch ability there that, you can throw them the ball and they can make plays on their own. And that's another thing I like about a wide receiver. But to me, those are 2 really big things outside of, speed and other things like that. But that's really why I fell in love with Royals, because seeing that on film really stood out to me while watching him. Does he have some other issues? Absolutely. Experienced. I think it's just 2 years at Utah State, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check on that before I talk out of my butt here. Separation issues, 3 years. Oh, 3 years. But I think you only got 2 years of true production, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's where I was going with that. And then press coverage, dealing with a lot of contact can kind of throw him off his routes a little bit, but he's still someone that I'm really high on. I like the upside. This is the opposite of what I liked about Ayomanor, is that Royals guy I think has some more upside in his game there. So, but Coach Tyler, how do you feel about him?
Yeah, Jalen Royals, this is going to be a competition guy. This is going to be one where I say, level of competition kind of leads to a little bit of the success. I do like Jalen Royals, but like you said, 2 years of production. That's 1,000 yards, 1,080 yards in 2023, and then 834 this past year. But he only played in 7 games, missed the rest of the season with a foot injury. I think he's more of an IQ player than anything. Like you said, the experience. His first year, he was at Georgia Military College, and still only had 7 receptions for 92 yards in 11 games. And then 2022, played in 12 games, had 1 start, but had no receptions, nothing, no returns, nothing to put on, a box score, no stat sheet. So we did see, 2 years, it was the breakout, right? But it was a 2-year breakout within the Mountain West. And so there's different things I see. Obviously, ran a 4.42 at the combine, so not straight line speed, slow for any, for any reason. But as he's running routes, I don't see enough of the vertical speed. I see his route running. There are positives, but there is a little bit more refinement that I would like to see. Lots of rounding of the routes. And as a high school trained receiver, it's not what you're supposed to do. So take it with a grain of salt. But Jalen Royals, I like him. I have him as my 10 right now. I see a role for him. And like I said, he's an IQ guy. I could see him being, one of those New England receivers, right? I could see him being a later day 2 receiver that's just going to wow people with the mentals, and then he's going to have the physical to back it up. I have him at my 10. I'm not blown away by him, partially because of just the lack of production, partially because of competition. Y'all know I'm not a big, discount anyone because of the competition, but when you can only put together 2 years of success at the Mountain West level, I'll have a couple questions.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. And over to our last slide of the night, guys, here. Just a couple sleepers here, just some guys that kind of name off the board here. These were the next guys in line in terms of fantasy pros and all that, Isaiah Bond, Torrey Horton, Ty Felton, Xavier Repto, Pat Bryant, Jack Beck, Savion Williams, Tez Johnson, Ricky White, obviously John mentioned Kyle Williams. Is there anyone else that you wanted to mention on this list here? Coach Tyler, I mean, you could mention them on this list, or if they're not on this list, real quick.
Yeah. Probably the one guy, it might be the cop out because he's my 11. He honestly should probably be up closer to my 8 or 9, would be Jack Besh. I just see so much love for him. Both from analysts, but also from GMs, people that talk to him, right? 6'1", 214. Obviously a big name within the Senior Bowl, which speaks a lot to what he's able to do. Went out and played following the terrorist attack in New Orleans that took his brother. Went out there and played, scored the game-winning touchdown in the Senior Bowl, but I think he still had MVP locked up, even if there wasn't the emotional side to everything. I think that he, again, is one of those IQ players. He is just physical in his route running, and you love that for a guy that's 6'2", going out there to run. But he's able to, play all over the field, and he's a guy that just loves getting open. He gets open very well, and I see a lot of just the outpouring of love being a sign that he is going to get taken at a spot that solidifies at least some amount of workload for the duration of his rookie contract. But I love Torrey Horton, love Kyle Williams out of Washington State. I've seen my Houston Texans have been meeting with him, so not going to be upset if he ends up in that receiver room. But yeah, those are really my 3 guys off of this list that I would talk about.
Yeah, no, Becca's Jamie, apologize not following you back before. I don't know what happened there. My apologies over on X. But yeah, absolutely. I like the comparison to kind of Keenan Allen type a little bit there. So a good wide receiver with athletic traits. A lot of people, I heard even up, like, I think for whatever podcast I was also listening to, is like, I think someone had him as up as high as 5. And I'm like, oof. Oh man, that's interesting. So yeah, Beck is someone I think a lot of people do like, kind of similar to, like, I feel like people were talking about Puka a little bit, later in the season there, and they just never caught on. People are catching on the Beck a lot more. Yeah, I mean, there's some decent wide receivers. I like Horton sometimes a little bit there. Obviously, I like Beck. I like Ricky White a little bit. Isaiah Bond's interesting if he can kind of like bring it all together. Just to throw some other names out there, a guy I really like is Jaden Land. He's someone I really do like there. Kyle Williams is my wide receiver 17. Nick Nash, I like. Caden Prattner is another guy to kind of keep your name out there of. There's some interesting guys that I do like overall. Just in general, like they're not studs, but they're like interesting wide receivers that could end up being somewhat of a decent bench piece to have on your team for a few years, or can have moments at the NFL level. So what Jamie said here, Respo, I liked him calling Respo not. Yes, he is the man that ran like the terrible. It was like 4.8 or some shit, 4.88 or something like that, right?
I'll find it.
Yeah, it was something in that range. It was less than, like Jamie said, it was 300-pound lineman actually ran faster than him. And then what did he say here? Let's see. Land Larson is the running back to keep your eyes on. Okay. I like that. I have no idea who that is, to be honest. I have to look him up now that you said that. Then I feel like I've watched a lot of running backs. I don't remember his name coming up there. So.
I don't know that name either, so I'm very intrigued to figure out who this is.
I'm going to be doing some homework tonight, Jamie, so thank you so much. I appreciate that. I like finding some more sleepers, especially for running back. So, but we are going to wrap things up tonight, guys. Since this is our top wide receiver show here. We appreciate you guys all for tuning in tonight. Jamie, obviously, appreciate you coming in the chat and talking with us, and subscribing and us subscribing back to you finally on X. We apologize about that. Oh, hold on. Sorry, Tyler. I'm not better than you. I should have a big screen. I was looking. I was like, you're still small on my screen. But yeah, guys, this is gonna be our last episode for the month of April here. Oh, that's not true actually. But this is our last episode until the NFL draft hits here, because didn't feel like it was necessary to throw out a filler episode right before the NFL draft here. We'll be back for like 3 or 4 episodes, and we'll talk about all the NFL prospects once they land on their teams. We'll break down every single player that was drafted and maybe some undrafted ones when we get there. And then we'll do like a mock draft, kind of showing off where some of these players go, where you can find the values in your rookie drafts. And then, before you know, it's going to be the NFL 2025 season is going to be here. So, Coach Tyler, is there anything you want to say before we get going?
Yeah, go check out dynastynerds.com. That's how me and Coach Steve got connected. We talk about them every show, and that's because they're worth talking about every show. We've got a lot of stuff going up there in terms of articles, different podcasts that are going on over there. But we're 14 days. No, we're 10 days away.
10 days, wow. Yeah.
I was thinking the 28th for some reason. We're 10 days away from the draft. And where we've watched just about all of our film for all of these breakdowns has been in the Dynasty film room, right? Editors do a great job over there of cutting up a bunch of the all-22 film for just about everyone. We got to go see if the Lannister or whatever his name is on there now. I'd be interested to see that. But, go check out Dynasty Nerds. There we go, Jamie, part of the nerd herd. Go check out Dynasty Nerds. Use code COACH when you get over there. Let them know that we sent you, and thank y'all for listening.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we definitely appreciate if you do that. If you're not a member, obviously it's definitely a great community for sure. Me and Coach Tyler part of it, and obviously Jamie too. So we thank you guys all for tuning in, listening. Like I said, we won't be back on our normal Monday show next week, but we will be back on the 28th, going over the NFL draft and breaking all that down. We're gonna have another guest on the show at least. It's gonna be a little bit of a later show. So if our normal 6 p.m. show. Okay. I know Mike Hicks. Yeah, love Mike Hicks. Great guy. It's probably going to be a later show next week, that week there. So, if you're got some things to do after work, get them done and then come join our show. I think it's going to be around 9 p.m., but we will let you guys know if anything else changes. But we thank you guys all for tuning in, listening, whether it's live on our YouTube channel or if you're listening not live, but if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast, we appreciate you guys a lot as well, too. So, like I said, we do this for free, guys. We do it because we love the game of fantasy and football, and obviously, Coach Tyler loves prospects. So, but we thank you guys all for listening and tuning in. Tune in until next time, guys, and have a great one.